You think your life is hard? In 14th century London, people threw their waste directly into the street. Garde-à-lou was the only warning you would ever get. Children as young as 5 worked 16-hour shifts in coal mines, all for just 2 pennies a day. And your chances as a Roman gladiator? There was a 20% death rate. Every single fight. But that is just the beginning. Today, you will discover 80 verified facts from medieval Europe, Victorian England, and ancient Rome that prove you likely would not survive 24 hours in the past. We researched the reality for 90% of the population, because if you were not part of the wealthy elite, this was your life. From disgusting hygiene standards to absurd medicine and deadly laws. Here is what to expect. Let us start with hygiene and daily life. In 14th century London, there were 50,000 inhabitants, but only 12 public toilets. Most people used a chamber pot and emptied it out the window. Garde-à-lou was your only warning before getting drenched. What hours till some think people never bathed? Public bathhouses actually existed until the 16th century. They only closed due to fears of syphilis. After that, bathing just once or twice a year became the normal standard. Even the iconic plague doctor masks had a strange logic. They were filled with herbs because people believed bad air caused disease. The long beak actually served as an accidental social distancing tool, keeping doctors 6 feet away from infected patients, which actually saved lives. Dental care was just as primitive. Most people chewed on willow twigs. By the time sugar became cheap in Victorian England, the average 30-year-old was already missing 8 or more teeth. In ancient Rome, they used a unique cleaning agent, urine. Laundry workers collected it publicly because the ammonia worked like bleach. Emperor Vespasian even introduced a urine tax. Wat Auerson criticized. He famously noted that money does not stink. Back in the home, a straw mattress was a paradise for rats. The average London household in 1665 had 10 to 20 rats living in the walls. Their fleas carried the plague, which killed 100,000 residents out of a population of 460,000. Bedbugs and lice were a fact of life for everyone, from the poorest peasant to the king on his throne. There was no toilet paper until the year 1857. Before then, people used leaves, moss, or corn cobs. City streets were covered in animal waste. In 1890, the 50,000 horses in London produced 500 tons of manure every single day. Wat Auerson families did bathe, they often shared the same water. The father went first, followed by the mother, then the children by age. The youngest child ended up bathing in everyone else's filth. Body odor was universal since deodorant did not exist, and perfume was only for the ultra-rich. Instead of plates, many people ate off stale bread called trenchers, which were either eaten afterward or given to beggars. Floors were not scrubbed. They were covered in straw that absorbed spills and vermin, changed only twice a year. Surprisingly, medieval peasants actually had more days off than modern workers. With around 150 religious holidays per year, they had 3 times more free time than a modern employee. Now let us look at what you would eat and drink. Everyone drank small beer, even children. It had an alcohol content of 2 to 3%. This was necessary because the brewing process killed bacteria in contaminated water. An Englishman in the year 1500 drank 300 liters of beer per year, compared to about 70 liters today. There is a common myth that spices were used to mask rotten meat, but spices were so expensive, pepper was literally worth its weight in gold, that nobody would waste them on spoiled food. Spices were strictly for showing off wealth. In Rome, a fermented fish sauce called garum was used on every dish. It was made from fish innards and was considered a delicacy. In later centuries, bakers often stretched flour by adding sawdust, chalk, or plaster. Since most people were illiterate, they had no way of knowing the recipe was tampered with. Without refrigeration, meat grew maggots within hours during the summer. Standard procedure was to simply wash them off or cook them into the meal. Identifying meat was also guesswork. You often did not know if you were eating pork, rat, or horse. until you started chewing. Salt was so precious for preserving meat that Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in it, which is where we get the word salary. Milk spoiled within hours because there was no pasteurization, so most adults stuck to cheese and butter. The wealthy often avoided vegetables, believing they caused disease, and instead ate meat exclusively, which often led to scurvy. On Fridays, when meat was forbidden by the church, whale was classified as fish, making whale steaks a popular substitute. Most families cooked in one single pot that simmered constantly, with new ingredients added to the old scraps every day. The medical world was even more dangerous. Bloodletting was the go-to solution for everything from fevers to the plague. The theory was that bad humors needed to be released. In reality, it just weakened the patient. George Washington likely died from this practice in 1799 after doctors drained 2.5 liters of his blood. Watt-hour-style, the average life expectancy was only 30 years. This is skewed by the fact that 50% of children died before age 5. If you survived childhood, you might reach your 50s. Smallpox had a 30% death rate, while the plague could kill up to 90% of those infected. Until the 16th century, boiling oil was poured into wounds to seal them. Watt-Hourson surgeons suggested using soothing salves instead. They were initially mocked. Even more shocking is trepanation, the practice of drilling holes in the skull to release evil spirits. Archaeologists have found ancient skulls with healed holes, suggesting a 50% survival rate despite the lack of anesthesia. Until the 17th century, your barber was also your surgeon. They used the same tools for haircuts and amputations. The red and white barber pole actually represents blood and bandages. If you had syphilis, the treatment was rubbing mercury all over your body, which caused tooth loss and brain damage. Modern anesthesia did not exist, so surgery meant being held down while you screamed. There was no understanding of germ theory until the 1860s. Doctors rarely washed their hands between patients, and those who suggested it, like Ignaz Semmelweis, were often shunned or even sent to asylums. Leeches were used for headaches and infections, and doctors even diagnosed patients by tasting their urine. Nearsighted people simply stumbled through life since glasses were rare until the 15th century. The Black Death, between 1347 and 1353, killed up to 200 million people in Europe, wiping out entire villages. Tuberculosis was so common in the 19th century that coughing up blood was considered a normal part of life. Dental work involved pliers and brute force, and arsenic was frequently prescribed as a medicine, leading to slow poisoning. Legal punishments were just as brutal. In medieval England, stealing anything worth more than 12 pence could result in the death penalty or having a hand cut off. Executions were treated as public entertainment. Hanging days were holidays where families brought picnics and vendors sold snacks. During the witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, up to 60,000 people were killed. A common test was throwing the accused into water. If they drowned, they were innocent. If they floated, they were a witch and were burned. In ancient Rome, up to 30% of the people were slaves with no legal rights. Child labor was a grim reality well into the industrial era. In 1840, 5-year-olds worked 12 hours a day in total darkness in coal mines. Small boys were used as chimney sweeps, often suffering from burns and long-term illness. If you could not pay your debts, you were sent to a debtor's prison, where your entire family might live indefinitely. Treason resulted in being drawn and quartered, a process so violent it was designed to be as slow and public as possible. Trial by ordeal meant holding red-hot iron or reaching into boiling water. If your burns healed quickly, you were declared innocent. Being homeless was also a crime, punishable by whipping or forced labor. Women had almost no legal rights and were considered the property of their fathers or husbands. The Royal Navy often used press gangs to kidnap men off the street for forced military service. Minor crimes landed you in the stocks where the public would throw stones and waste at you. Marriage for girls as young as 12 was legal and common. To summarize, life in the past was a constant gamble. 1 in 3 women died in childbirth because of infection and poor hygiene. Half of all children never made it to their 5th birthday. Over 90% of the population was illiterate, and a single bad harvest could lead to a famine that killed millions. The past was not a simpler time. It was a daily fight for survival against germs, hunger, and violence. We often take antibiotics, clean water, and human rights for granted, but they are very recent developments in human history. If this perspective made you more grateful for the modern world, consider sharing your thoughts. We will continue to explore the hidden realities of history in our future research.